Hello everyone and welcome back to Age Nagash, which is a channel dedicated to Age of Sigmar. And in this video, it's going to be the first video of my lore and army videos for the armies of Age of Sigmar. So what I will say first off is I have just came off a 17-hour shift from work. So I'm a little bit tired, so apologies for that. But I wanted to get this video done today to try and get it uploaded to get this series started. So in this video, it's going to be the lore of the Nighthaunt, and it's going to be talking about basically what they were before Age of Sigmar, and then how they have came about in what we know today as Age of Sigmar. So starting with the world that was, what they were essentially part of the Vampire Count armies from Sylvania, which of course was home to the vampires back then, such as Vlad von Carstein, Manfred von Carstein, Isabella von Carstein and Conrad von Carstein, and many more than that, and famous necromancers. So within this very sort of desolated, well, I say desolated, I mean, to me I think it sounds like a lovely place in the world that was, but to what most mortals would describe as a horrific, sinister place. That is where the majority of the Nighthaunt were, and like I say, they formed part of the Vampire Count army. They weren't really a huge part of the army, they were sort of mainly just a handful of units, to be honest, certainly compared to how many units they've got now. And what units they did have, so the sort of more traditional Nighthaunt units, if you like, is they had Spirit Hosts, they had Khan Race, they had Tomb Banshees, and they also had the Black Coaches. And I say the Black Coaches, they weren't really too ethereal back then, but as we know, the Black Coach is part of the Nighthaunt army now, so it's quite relevant. So that is how they were then, and that's all there really is to say about them in the old world, because they weren't their own army, they just formed part of the Vampire Count army. So now looking into them, going into Age of Sigmar, so before the Necroquake, what we will get onto in a little bit, Nighthaunt again, they were their own army this time, however they still just had that handful of units. So there wasn't that much to them for quite a long time, really, because what are we now, like 3-4 years into Age of Sigmar, and they've only just over a few months ago had their boom, their own battle tome come out and their own army really start to appear. So they sort of filled the same sort of role. I mean, you could make a Nighthaunt army at the start of Age of Sigmar, but you just sort of filter them into the rest of your Death army, if you like. And the only sort of lore we have of them at the start of Age of Sigmar is that out of all the Death armies, they have the strongest hatred for the living, as they are cruelly not able to rest in peace. They are constantly reminded by this every second of every day, and this really fuels their anger. And then a little bit more flavour to add to the Nighthaunt when they first appeared in Age of Sigmar at the start was a army led by Arkan the Black, which was the Iron Haunt host, and this was basically Arkan's army, and it was half Nighthaunt and half Flesh Eater Court. And the idea behind this army of Arkan was he would use this army to take out the strongest fortifications that any opponent of Nagash had. So what they would do is, obviously the Nighthaunt, their spirits and their ethereal, so they can pass through walls, they can fly over barricades, and they would go in, they would slaughter every single soldier or civilian, woman, child, man, it did not matter. They were all souls that could serve Nagash. So whilst the Nighthaunt would go in there and take out all the defences, then the gates would open up for the Flesh Eater Courts to pour in, and the Flesh Eater Courts would, as their name describes, eat the remains of the bodies of souls that were taken. So when passing armies or allies of the fortresses that were taken by the Iron Haunt host would enter these abandoned barricades, there would be nothing left to see apart from maybe the odd remains of a body that a Flesh Eater Court did not devour, and only left with the stench of death. So that was the Iron Haunt host. So this is really sort of the only flavour we had to the Nighthaunt when it first came out in Age of Sigmar. I want to say it first came out, I mean basically when it carried over from Warhammer Fantasy. So there was a little bit there what was quite nice. gives you sort of an idea how you can build your own army. But unfortunately, back then, you know, how the Nighthaunt worked, you could make an army out of it, but it's very, very limited. Like I said, very much a handful of units there. So, that's what they were like in Warhammer Fantasy, in the world that was. And that's what they were like when they carried over into Age of Sigmar. But now we're a few years down the line, and of course, a few months ago, we were given the Nighthaunt Battle Tome as the start of the Soul Wars part of Age of Sigmar, which basically, to sum it up, was all to do with how all souls are rightfully owed to Nagash. You know, he is the, you know, our Lord and Saviour, you know, praise him, and he is the god of death, so he deserves all the souls. That might be because he killed all the other gods of death, and now he's got no rivals in that sort of department, but, you know, fair play, you know, survival of the strongest and the fittest. And then, like I said, there are some people stealing his soul, so never guess this guy, probably haven't heard of him before. This guy called Sigmar is stealing Nagash's souls, and the most sort of heroic, the strongest souls, you know, belonging to ancient warriors of old and warriors of new who have died in battle. Sigmar would take the souls and forge them into his Stormcast Eternal armies, which was obviously a massive insult to Nagash. You know, the traitor Sigmar betrayed Nagash's trust, and Nagash no longer wishes to hear the lies of Sigmar, which, you know, you can't really blame him because Sigmar is I'm not going to use that word. But anyway, and then we have different souls that are being taken. So souls that are being taken from Slaanesh by the elven gods, such as, you know, Tyrion and, well, I say Marafi's not really god, but you know what I mean. So the elven, you know, pantheon, if you like. And then you've got they are elves, but you've also got the Deepkin who are taking the souls in their own way to, you know, basically sustain their own survival, which, you know, might sound like a necessity they've got for themselves. However, they're still stealing souls from Nagash, so they're still an enemy. So in case you haven't already, note that down, Deepkin, they need to die. And that's basically what really started this. This really what got Nagash really sort of annoyed and really decided that, you know what, he's had enough of this, trying to play friends with everyone. He's just going to do his own thing because everyone keeps on betraying him. So he had an idea, and that idea was, whilst everyone was fighting it out amongst themselves, he would use his best weapon he has as death, and that would be time. So what his plan was is to gather all the physical substance of death magic in the realm of Shaiish, which was known as Gravesand. So what he was going to do is collect all this Gravesand from this realm while everyone else was busy, and then use it to build a black pyramid, which, if you're familiar with Warhammer Fantasy lore, that might sound quite familiar, but it's completely different Age of Sigmar, because instead of it being a normal period, it's upside down. So, you know, really original there, top points of Games Workshop. So what his plan was is to build this black pyramid, and then it was basically a device that when it triggered and when it went off, it would wipe out all life in Age of Sigmar in all the realms, and then Nagash would be able to resurrect all life under his rule and his will alone. And in all fairness to Nagash, if he managed to achieve this, and one of the reasons why he did, obviously he wanted ultimate control of you know, the mortal realms and all there is to existence. However, if he did do this though, he would defeat chaos, because if he did this, there would be no will apart from his own, because yes, vampires and stuff have, you know, like their own schemes and all that sort of, and their own ideas, but ultimately they serve the will of Nagash, because they are part of his creation. You know, if it wasn't for Nagash, if Nagash never existed, vampires would never exist. And if Nagash managed to achieve this, this would stop chaos being able to feed on those energies that really it relies on for its survival. And when I mean chaos, I mean, you know, particularly the chaos gods, you know, Khorne for anger, Nurgle for like disease and pestilence, because if everything's already dead, there is not really much disease that can happen anymore. As you know, all flesh will eventually rot away. And then you've got Aziz, who relies on change and, you know, really chaotic decisions. And then you've got Slaanesh that relies on, you know, like lust and pleasure and excess. And as all of those may be within Nagash, and it's an interesting argument, because you can, you know, say if Nagash has got the power of will over every single soul in the mortal realms, would that not make him a huge target for the Chaos Gods to feed on? That's a potential possibility, but if that is not the case, he would really wipe out the Chaos Gods, which really does make Nagash the good guy of the story. That's completely from my point of view, so you might want to take it with a pinch of salt, but I like to think of myself as quite an unbiased guy on who I favour in Age of Sigmar, so my views are pretty reliable and pretty non-biased. So that was Nagash's plan. And also he wanted to do it just because basically Sigmar pissed him off, so fuck him, let's kill everybody. That was like his other motive, I suppose, you might think of it that way. So what happened is that eventually the other Grand Alliances sort of, well, I say the other Grand Alliances, I mean it was mainly Order that sort of found out about this sort of plan what Nagash had. They didn't know exactly what the mechanism was going to do, this Black Pyramid, but they had basically a good idea, and they realised that whatever it's going to do is not going to be good for them. So you had things like the Deepkin that led a huge Orc Warg right out the front doors of Nagashazar, which is where the Black Pyramid was, to basically make this huge threat in front of Nagash, so Nagash would have to deal with it whilst he's trying to carry out this ritual. And whilst Nagash was having to do that, he did also plan for this inevitability that, you know, basically the other Grand Alliances were going to find out about this, so he did have to have his defences, he did have to have things in plan and contingencies for when things go wrong and how to deal with them. So he had that, but however, a huge, you know, greenskin warg at the front of his gates suddenly was a little bit surprising, maybe caught him off guard just a little bit, but like I said, he was prepared for these sorts of things. However, what he was not prepared for is the lovely furry ratmen that we call the Skaven. And the Skaven are famous for ruining Nagash's plans, and in particular when he wants to wipe out all life. So what the Skaven managed to do, and under Nagash's nose, was go into the mechanism itself, so into the Black Pyramid. As the Skaven in Age of Sigmar, they can teleport through not just realm gates, but they have their own way of doing it, and these are, I think they're called Narholes. So basically, as they're so foul and so much pestilence and so much corruption and just basically so much Skaven-esque, they managed to actually make holes into reality, which they can use to teleport wherever they want. And when I say whenever they want, it's a little bit hit or miss. I mean, yes, this time they worked out, they managed to get inside the Black Pyramid, but by no means at all was this the first time they tried to go into that Black Pyramid. They did have a lot of failures with that. I mean, one time, I don't think this was trying to get into the Black Pyramid, but it was just an odd time. They tried to get somewhere. Turns out they got to the bottom of a sea in Shoish, and because of that, they opened up a huge whole reality into this sea from wherever they were, and what they did is basically just drain the sea and flooded wherever the Skaven was. So that army of the Skavens took a bit of a beating. So, going back to the story. So when the Skaven got into this Black Pyramid, it was Arkan who felt that there was something wrong. He felt that, you know, there was a vermin infestation within, you know, Nagash's great plan. And the reason why the Skaven were there is because, like how it was in fantasy when they went into a Black Pyramid, is they were after something. And what they were after was this grave sand, because this grave sand, although it's not exactly warp stone, it very much reminded them of warp stone, and they could feel and sense the power of it from miles and miles and thousands of miles and even realms away. So they thought, why not go there, take the grave sand, take it for ourselves, should be easy enough done. And actually how they wanted to do it is because the grave sand was made into a Black Pyramid, they wanted to basically just take the Black Pyramid and go back to their home with this magic source of power. Little bit hard, I don't know how they were going to do that, but you know, they had a plan and I respect them for that. So that was their reason, and that's why they were there. So like I said, Arkan discovered this sort of, you know, Skaven threat, not really Skaven, but he sensed that there was something wrong. However, Nagash had bigger concerns to worry about. He had this huge warg outside his you know, front gate of Nagashazar that already started attacking Nagashazar, and really causing some damage. And he also had the armies of Order on their way on the horizon, that when they arrived it was really going to turn the tide against the Nagash, and the Nagash was essentially now running out of time. So he decided to start his mechanism, to start the Black Pyramid, to eventually get what is truly owed to him, which is all the souls of existence in the realms. However, because he started the mechanism and he basically sealed the door to the mechanism, so everything that was in the Black Pyramid could not get out, which to Nagash he believed it was empty. But like we've just said, there was the Skaven inside, and I think there was Skaven or Clan Eshin. I can't remember correctly, but I think that's what I think it's Clan Eshin that was inside. And because of that, it really sort of tipped the balance, having these, Chaos Souls within this mechanism. So what actually happened is when the Black Pyramid started to work and started to go into motion, it started going off balance slightly because of these, like I said, this imbalance that was inside it, being these Chaos Souls. And so, unfortunately for Nagash, and I think for all of us and for all of our souls, it didn't go to plan exactly. Instead of wiping out all life so he could resurrect it in his own will, or destroy every single afterlife that there was in Age of Sigmar, so instead of whatever religion some mortals might have, like when they die they go to this afterlife, instead of that they would just go straight to Nagash. There's no limbo, there's nothing like that. They just go straight to Nagash and their souls are his. So what it actually did instead was resurrected all the rest of the souls that there were in mortal realms. So these were on obvious places, so like battlefields. They're also in towns, graveyards, deserts where people died of natural causes, mountains, seas, oceans. It raised all of these dead across the whole mortal realms as spirits, and this is where the main Nighthaunt force came from. All of a sudden, boom, it was there all across the realms, causing death to every mortal there was out there, and there was no place to hide. So this hugely changed how, even the landscape of how the mortal realms was, because suddenly there was this army that it was, like I said, it's all over the whole mortal realms. Doesn't matter where you hide, that could, apart from if you're in Azir, because bloody Sigmar and his gates and trying to hold back the whole enemies, and not fun, and him having a safe base of operations and all that sort of thing. Boring. But anyway, this army popped up everywhere. Like I said, there's no place to hide from it, and it was just reaping a countless amount of souls. So this really had to make every single other, not just Grand Alliance, but every single faction within these Grand Alliance, and every single army had to rethink their strategies, had to sort of go back to their own territory and sort of think actually we've got to be a bit more on the defense against these spirits. And whilst this is all good and all great, over time the Nighthaunt sort of lost momentum, and not in the sort of way that if you had a huge army of, let's just say, 3 people, it could be a huge army, you could go on a crusade, to cleanse chaos, etc. But over time it's going to take casualties, it's going to take hits, and it's going to lose momentum in the sense of the armies shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, because over battles a lot of its soldiers are dying. However, that was not the case with these Nighthaunt, because although there's ways to banish spirits of the dead, it was mainly a case of they had a lack of coordination. And this was because obviously Nagash has control over all of his deathless creatures. However, they really didn't have a general, the Nighthaunt. They just didn't have that leader. It's really hard, obviously for Nagash to try and micromanage everything. So what Nagash needed was a general for his new Nighthaunt Legion to try and unite them. Like I said, they were scattered across the realms, obviously because people died in many different places where the spirits popped up from. So he really needed to unite them under one force. And who he got to do this was, he realised he needed a new Mortarch. So the Mortarch he summoned to his power and was promoted to that rank was the Lady Olinda. So she is the Mortarch of Grief, and she is quite an interesting character, as essentially what she is sorrow, misery, grief, and sadness and depression and all those nasty thoughts and feelings made into a weapon and made manifest. She can even make warriors of the toughest sort lay down their weapons as they accept their inevitable end, or even make a mother realise that there is no hope for their child and surrender them. She is the pure manifest of terror within the legions of Nagash, and being that the legions of death itself. So now that these what were originally just sort of mindless spirits slaughtering everything in their path when they are risen from their graves, now they have got a leader to lead them and to give them strategy and tactics what can really wield this what was, you know, quite barbaric and quite, like I said, on purpose weapon of Nagash, can really wield it into a weapon of purpose. So now that Nagash has got that, it's basically another tool in his tool belt, really. Essentially, out of his whole legions, there is not many legions that can do what this one can do within his armies, because this is an army that is obviously ethereal, like I mentioned earlier. It can go through fortifications, go through barricades. They're silent as well, as they can appear, they can teleport, they can come from the underworlds at their commander's wish. And this makes them a really huge threat that every other army that is not under Nagash's command in the mortal realms is now going to have to take very seriously, and not just take him as essentially what they were when they first appeared, as a force of nature, but now to actually take them as an army, like I said, with purpose and with a motive to wipe out all life there is. So that is basically summarised of what the Nighthaunt are now in Age of Sigmar and where they came from fantasy. And as this is to do that they've got a battle tome out now, so they've got a lot more lore obviously, and they've been a big part of the Soul Wars. However, a lot of armies that when Age of Sigmar first came about, in fantasy they had loads of lore, and then in Age of Sigmar they've basically stripped the lore back because they're starting afresh. However, the Nighthaunt are sort of the opposite of that, because they didn't have too much lore. Of course they had a bit back in Warhammer Fantasy and in the world that was, but now it's really their time to shine. They've really been freshened up and brought to, it's a little bit like a parallel to this would be, let's take the Ogre Kingdoms of Warhammer Fantasy, of the world of old. They had quite a lot of lore going for them, especially towards the end. And then in Warhammer Age of Sigmar, apart from Beast Core Raiders that got battle tome, like the main force of what Ogre Kingdoms was, which is now the Gutbusters, they're really sort of like lacking in that department for lore, which, you know, I'm sure their time will come, and, you know, destruction is on the rise. But I'm just saying that's like a parallel to what the Nighthaunt have got here. So now is really their time to shine. So if you're interested in them, now is a really good time to get started with them. And what I would say is I will do a army video as well, obviously to this, because this is the lore video. And then I'll do an army video. When I say an army video, it's going to really include lore as well, because I'll be talking about the lore of the individual units. And Nighthaunt now have got quite a few of them. They certainly don't just have a handful anymore, so there'll be quite a lot to talk about with them. I'm going to try and put that up this week. Hopefully I should be able to, as I've managed to get this one done today. And yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I certainly enjoyed looking into the Nighthaunt lore and seeing where they came from the Warhammer Fantasy to where they are now in Age of Sigmar. And the reason why I started with the Nighthaunt one first is obviously it's quite popular at the moment, but also because it was a suggestion from a guy called Mike Thompson that put a comment on my last video. So as he put a comment and he said he'd quite like to see this one soon, I thought I'd do it as my first one. I believe he also wants to see a Legion of Blood one, so I'm going to try and work on that for next week. And if you guys would like to see a certain army, you know, for me to do as part of this series, please let me know in the comments, and I'll try and get to it as soon as I can, as it's really good to hear what you guys would like me to do, rather than me going and basically doing all the sort of lore and army videos that I want to do. So it's great to hear your opinions as well, basically. And yeah, so that's about it. So like I say, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like, subscribe and comment down below, as like I always say, that you know, can't help me enough. It really does help me make as many videos as I can. If you would actually like to listen to a bit more about the Nighthaunt Lore, like I said, I'm going to do an army video on that, but also please feel free to check out a couple other lore videos I've done for the Nighthaunt so far. It just gives them a bit more personality, it's a bit more like storytelling. So if you want to check that out, it's absolutely fine. There's a playlist on my YouTube channel, so crack on there. And like I said, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I thank you very much for watching it. And remember, until next time, Nagash is all, and all is one in Nagash.